Dinner is cancelled, my daughter-in-law said, feigning illness while the scent of roast chicken still clung to my apron. 10 minutes later, I heard her voice through the kitchen speaker, laughing about toasting with my credit card at a new restaurant. They think I am just an old woman who forgot how to count. They are wrong. I remember every cent, and tonight, I start calculating exactly what they owe me. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 63 years old, a widow, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought I was a respected mother and mother-in-law. I stood in the center of my small kitchen in Maple Ridge, a town where the houses are old and the secrets are usually kept behind thick velvet curtains. The air around me was heavy with the scent of rosemary, garlic, and slow-roasted beef. It was a smell that usually meant comfort, but tonight, it just smelled like wasted time. Steam rose from the large pot on the stove, curling against the yellow light of the ceiling fixture. I had spent 3 hours preparing this meal. I had selected the meat myself, checking the price per pound carefully, as I always did. I wiped a small smudge of grease from the countertop with a rag. I liked things clean. I liked things to balance. "Mum?" Brianna's voice floated up from the bottom of the stairs. It was a sweet voice, the kind that sounds like syrup poured over crushed ice. "Dinner is cancelled tonight. Okay, I am feeling just really terrible. My stomach is in knots." I paused, my hand hovering over the ladle. I felt a sharp pang of disappointment, a small crack in the evening I had built in my mind. But I forced a smile onto my face, even though no one was there to see it. "Oh, that is a shame, dear," I called back, keeping my tone light. "Do not worry. You go rest. I will pack this up for later." "Thanks, Mom. You are the best," she replied, though the gratitude sounded thin. I turned off the burner. The silence in the kitchen felt sudden and heavy. I began to move the roast into plastic containers, my movements automatic. I was disappointed. Yes. But I told myself it happened. People got sick, plans changed. Then I heard the floorboards creak in the living room below. The acoustics in this old house were peculiar. Sound traveled through the vents like water through a pipe. I heard the front door open, but not close. Then came the whispers. "Do you think she bought it?" Jason's voice. My son. The boy I had tutored at this very kitchen table until midnight so he could pass algebra. "Totally," Brianna whispered back, her voice no longer sick, just conspiratorial. "She is clueless. Come on. We are going to lose our reservation at that new place downtown." I froze. The plastic container in my hand felt suddenly cold. I stood perfectly still behind the kitchen door, straining to hear. "I do not know, Bree," Jason said, though he did not sound worried, just cautious. "That place is expensive. We are tight this month. Relax." Brianna laughed, a low, throaty sound. "We are not paying, we are not paying." "What do you mean?" "I still have it," she said. "Your mom's card. She never checks the statements. She is old. Jason. She probably forgets what she bought 5 minutes ago." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a physical pain, a squeezing sensation that made it hard to breathe. But the twist of the knife came a second later. The small, smart speaker on my kitchen counter, which usually only played the weather report, suddenly crackled to life. Brianna's phone must have auto-connected to the Bluetooth as she walked past the garage range extender. Her voice filled my kitchen, amplified and undeniable. "Dinner is cancelled. We are toasting with your mum's card. Babe, let's go order the lobster. The connection cut off with a sharp beep as they moved out of range. I stood there for a long time. The refrigerator hummed its steady, electric drone. The house settled with a groan. My heart felt like it had been ripped out and thrown onto the floor, but my hands were steady. I looked down at them. These were the hands of a woman who had worked as a factory accountant for 40 years. I knew how to spot a variance. I knew how to find a thief in the ledger. I turned and looked at my purse sitting on the shelf. I remembered giving the card to Brianna last week. Just for some cleaning supplies, she had said. I am a little short until payday. I had trusted her. I had trusted him. I did not cry. Tears are for people who are surprised. I was not surprised anymore. I was calculating. I walked over to the drawer where I kept the junk mail and the scissors. I reached to the very back and pulled out a worn, black leather notebook. It was my old ledger. The one I used to track our savings when my husband Thomas was still alive. I sat down at the table in the dim light. I opened the book to a fresh, blank page. I picked up a pen and pressed the tip firmly against the paper. Day 1, I wrote, my handwriting sharp and angular. Dinner cancelled, and my credit card starts telling the truth. I was not born in this quiet house with its creaking porch and peeling wallpaper. I came from a place of grey skies and endless smokestacks. A cold industrial city in the Midwest, where the morning air tasted like sulphur and the factory whistle dictated when you ate, slept, and breathed. My childhood was measured in the rhythm of shift changes and the smell of engine oil that never quite washed out of my father's clothes. By the time I was 22, I was the head bookkeeper for a small tool manufacturing plant. That was where I learned the language of numbers. I learned that a ledger is a story, and if there is a gap, it means someone is hiding a chapter. I could spot a variance of 3 cents in a column of thousands. My boss used to tell me, Evelyn, you have eyes like a hawk. Nothing gets past you. I took pride in that. I was the guardian of the truth, down to the last penny. Then came Thomas. He was a mechanic, a man with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints and a smile that made the smog seem less choking. We saved every dollar we could, putting them in a tin box under the floorboards until we had enough to move here to Maple Ridge. We bought this house. It was old even then, but it was ours. We thought we had forever, but forever is a lie people tell themselves to sleep at night. Thomas died in a car accident on Route 9 when Jason was a sophomore in high school. The police officer who came to the door looked so young. I am so sorry, Mrs. Hart. He had stammered, unable to meet my eyes. There was nothing anyone could do. I did not have the luxury of collapsing. I had a mortgage that suddenly looked like a mountain and a grieving teenage boy who needed sneakers and textbooks. I took a second job doing payroll for a bakery at night. For 4 years. I barely slept. I remember sitting at this very kitchen table at midnight, my feet throbbing in my shoes, helping Jason with his algebra. I don't see the point. Mom, Jason would say, throwing his pencil down, his eyes red from crying over his father. It is too hard. I should just quit and get a job. You will not quit. I would tell him, my voice steady, even when my hands were shaking from exhaustion. You are going to college. You are going to get out of this town. You are going to be someone. And he did. When he brought Brianna home years later, I felt a swell of victory. She was a city girl, polished and articulate, wearing clothes that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She spoke about art galleries and wine tastings. I felt intimidated, but also proud. My son had leveled up. He had escaped the oil and the grime. I remembered their wedding day vividly. I had looked at my savings account, the money I had scraped together for my old age. I liquidated it. All of it. I paid for the crystal stemware, the live band, the 7-course meal. I stood in the corner of the ballroom, watching them dance, and I whispered to myself, I don't need much, as long as they are happy. That memory, once warm and glowing, now felt like a shard of glass in my stomach. Tonight, that same son and that same polished daughter-in-law were sitting in a restaurant I could not afford, laughing at my expense. The warmth of my sacrifice had turned into the chill of betrayal. They were not just spending my money. They were spending the years I worked double shifts, the sleep I lost, and the retirement I surrendered. I ran my hand over the cool surface of the table. For my entire life, I had controlled the books for strangers. I had ensured every column balanced for the factory, for the bakery, for the household. But as I sat alone in the dark, I realized my greatest professional failure. I had never audited my own life. I had poured unlimited assets of love and money into my son without ever checking the return on investment. And now, the audit was finally beginning. The pattern of exploitation did not start with a bang. It started with the quiet, slippery erosion of boundaries. The morning after the cancelled dinner, Brianna stood at the front door, her keys jangling in her hand like a nervous tick. Mum, do not worry about the grocery cash this week, she said, her voice dripping with a pity that felt more like condescension. I will just swipe your card. It is faster that way, and I will transfer the money back to you at the end of the month. I promise. She did not wait for an answer. She just took the card from the hall table and walked out. I watched the heavy oak door close, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. I began to sift through my memory, looking at recent history through a new, harsher lens. I remembered the flight tickets to the coast last winter. Jason had called it a necessary networking trip. I remembered the 3 Italian suits he bought because he needed to look promotable. I remembered the modern art sculpture in the hallway that cost $400, which Brianna insisted was vital for the house's energy. It is just a temporary loan, Mum, Jason had told me back then, wrapping his arm around my shoulders and squeezing tight. We are family. You live with us. This house is basically mine one day anyway, right? What is mine is yours, and what is yours is, well, it stays in the family. At the time, his words had felt like reassurance. Now, they sounded like a threat. That evening at dinner, the air was thick enough to choke on. I had applied some medicated ointment to my knees, which were aching from the damp weather. Brianna wrinkled her nose as she picked at her salad. God, that smell. She muttered, waving her hand in front of her face. It is so overpowering. You know, Jason, we really need to think about gutting this ground floor soon. Open concept. If we keep it in this grandma style with these smells, it will be impossible to sell later. My fork clattered against my plate. Sell? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. This is my home. Brianna. She froze, realizing she had said the quiet part out loud. Oh, I just meant, hypothetically, in the distant future, for the market value. But later that night, as I passed the study, the door was cracked open just an inch. I heard Jason's low, urgent voice. The business loan requires collateral. Bri, if we put Mum's house up as the guarantee, the interest rate drops by 2%. It makes sense financially. Just do it. Brianna hissed back. She does not understand high finance. She will just sign where you tell her to sign. I walked away from the door, my legs feeling like lead. The next afternoon, my neighbor Ida waved to me from across the fence. She was a sweet woman who lived for updates on her grandchildren. "Evelyn," she called out, "where is that grandbaby?" Still no pitter-patter of little feet, I thought, with Jason doing so well. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I could not tell her that my son and his wife were postponing children to focus on leasing luxury cars and eating at five-star restaurants. Not yet. Ida. I lied, forcing a smile. They are just very focused on their careers right now. Building a foundation? Well, do not wait too long. Ida chirped. Time flies. It certainly did. Friday night. Jason came home long after midnight. He stumbled through the door, smelling of expensive scotch and cigars. "I will show them," he mumbled, bracing himself against the wall, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "I will show Mom. Show everyone." I am a big shot. I moved to help him, but stopped. From the kitchen, I saw Brianna. She was not rushing to help her husband. She was standing by the counter, opening my purse. She checked to make sure my credit card was still in the slot, nodded to herself, and then snapped the bag shut. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, invisible to them. I realized then that I was not a mother to them. I was not a matriarch. I was a kitchen appliance that dispensed money. I was an ATM that knew how to make pot roast. I retreated to the bathroom and locked the door. The fluorescent light hummed above me, harsh and unforgiving. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I traced the deep lines around my mouth and the loose skin on my neck. When I whispered to the woman in the glass, when did I stop being their shelter and start being their prey? The morning after the cancelled dinner, the house was silent. Jason and Brianna had left early, claiming they had a busy day of meetings, though I noticed Brianna's gym bag was missing at 9 in the morning, with the house finally empty. I sat down at the kitchen table. I placed my oversized handbag in front of me and pulled out the stack of mail I had been ignoring for months. I usually let Jason handle the mail. "It is too complicated for you, Mom," he would say. "Too much fine print." Today, I reached for the letter opener. My hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the anticipation of what I was about to find. I slit open the envelope from the credit card company. The paper unfolded with a crisp sound. I adjusted my reading glasses and began to read. It was not just a list of purchases. It was a diary of betrayal. There it was. The copper lantern. $340 on a Tuesday night. That was the night Brianna told me she was working late at the office and asked me to save her some leftover soup. I ran my finger down the column. Serenity Day Spa. $250. Luxe Home Interiors. $400. Next to each transaction was a digital authorization code, and in the small print, the signer was listed Brianna Hart. I opened my old ledger and began to copy the numbers. I underlined the dates. The spa day coincided with the day she told me she was staying home to budget better so we can buy a house. The furniture store visit was on the day she claimed she was at a charity event for orphans. I closed the book. I needed more than just a monthly statement. An hour later, I walked into the Maple Ridge Community Bank. The air conditioning was humming, smelling faintly of carpet cleaner and old money. I approached the counter where a young man named Alex sat. He looked to be about 25, with a tie that was tied a little too loosely. "Hello there, Mrs. Hart," Alex said, his voice pitching up an octave as if he were speaking to a toddler. "Did you lose your checkbook again, or do you need help with the candy jar?" I stood straighter, smoothing the front of my coat. "I am not here for candy, Alex," I said, my voice dropping to the low, flat tone I used to use when auditing the factory payroll. "I need a full transaction history for my primary credit line for the last 6 months. I also need to see the authorization forms for the recent credit limit increase." Alex blinked, his smile faltering. "Oh, well, usually we need to set up an appointment for—" "I know the regulations, Alex." I cut him off. "I am the primary account holder. Print them. Now." He typed rapidly, his face flushing pink. The printer whirred. He slid a stack of papers across the marble counter. I flipped to the back page. My breath hitched. The credit limit had been raised by $10,000. At the bottom of the request form was a signature. It read, "Evelyn Hart." It had my slant, my spacing, but the tail of the WASI was too long. It was a forgery, and a good one. "This increase," I said, tapping the paper. "Who submitted this?" "It was dropped off in the night deposit box," Alex mumbled, looking at his screen. "Processed 3 weeks ago." Then, his eyes widened slightly as he looked at a notification on his monitor. He hesitated. "Is there something else?" I asked. "Well, it is just this note here," Alex said, turning the screen slightly away, "but not enough. It says, pre-approved mortgage refinance pending, discussed with son, the heir." The room seemed to tilt. "The heir?" "Yeah," Alex said, scratching the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. "Your son, Jason. He called a few days ago. He was asking about the procedure for adding his name to the deed as a co-owner. He said you two were finalizing the paperwork." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were not just skimming off the top. They were planning to take the whole foundation. "I see," I said. The words tasted like ash. "Thank you, Alex. I have seen enough." I walked out of the bank. The sun was shining on the pavement, bright and oblivious to my world collapsing. I did not cry. I did not scream. My mind was a whirlwind of interest rates, equity values, and legal clauses. I stopped at a small coffee shop on the corner, needing to sit down before my legs gave out. I ordered a black coffee. While I waited, I pulled out my phone. I rarely used social media, mostly just to look at pictures of my friends' grandchildren. But today, I typed Jason's name into the search bar. His profile was public. The top post was from last night. It was a photo of Jason and Brianna. They were sitting in a booth at a restaurant with dim lighting, the copper lantern. They were holding up crystal flutes of champagne, their faces flushed with expensive wine and easy money. I read the caption, "Celebrating the future. Big things coming for the Hart family. New beginnings. Thanks to our favorite card." I stared at those last 4 words. Thanks to our favorite card. The pain in my chest, the heavy, suffocating grief of a mother betrayed, began to recede. In its place, something cold and hard settled in. It felt like the steel of the factory machinery I used to work around. "You are welcome," I whispered to the screen, my voice devoid of warmth. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. It was time to close the account. That night, sleep was a stranger to me. I sat in the circle of yellow light cast by my desk lamp, turning the pages of my old factory logbooks. The paper was brittle and smelled of dust and time. I ran my fingers over the columns of numbers I had written 30 years ago. I remembered a young payroll clerk named David who had once skimmed $50 from the petty cash fund to buy medicine for his sick mother. I had caught him, but instead of reporting him, I had covered the difference with my own money and corrected the ledger so he would not lose his job. I realized then that I had spent my entire life using my skills to protect others. I had balanced the books to save people from their own mistakes. But I had never used those skills to protect myself. I closed the book with a soft thud. That ended tonight. I was done being the shield. It was time to become the auditor. I moved quietly through the house, the floorboards settling under my weight. I took the stack of credit card statements and the forged credit increase form down to the basement. In the corner, behind a stack of old holiday decorations, sat a heavy steel safe. Jason thought it only contained Thomas's old watch and our marriage license. He was wrong. I placed the original documents inside and locked the heavy door. I had already made clear photocopies of everything at the library earlier that day. If they wanted a war, I would have the ammunition locked away where they could never find it. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes out of town to a roadside diner called the Blue Jay. It was the kind of place where truckers stopped for pie and the coffee tasted like burnt hazelnuts. I sat in a booth at the back, waiting for Marlene. Marlene was a sharp-tongued woman who had spent 20 years as a paralegal before retiring to run a small consulting firm. When she slid into the booth opposite me, she looked worried. "Evelyn, you sounded terrible on the phone," Marlene said, unwinding her scarf. "What is it? Is it your health I did not waste time with pleasantries?" I laid the photocopies on the laminate table between us. I told her everything. I told her about the cancelled dinner, the overheard conversation through the speaker, the forged signature, and the loan application. Marlene's mouth fell open. She picked up the papers, her hands shaking slightly. "My God," she whispered. "Evelyn, this is criminal fraud, Jason." I changed his diapers. How could he? She looked up at me, expecting to see a weeping mother. Instead, she saw a stone. "I do not want to fight." "Marlene," I said, my voice steady and low. "I do not want a screaming match in the living room. I want them to pay. I want them to pay exactly what they owe, down to the last cent. I want it legal. And I want it absolute." Marlene straightened up, the shock on her face replaced by a professional focus. She nodded. "Okay," she said. "If we do this, we do it right. We need to check the deed to your house immediately. We need to revoke any power of attorney you might have unknowingly signed, and we need to secure whatever liquid assets you have left." We spent the next hour mapping out a strategy on the back of a paper placemat. It felt good. It felt like work. "There is one more thing," I said, stirring my cold coffee. "I need more evidence. I need to prove this is a pattern, not a mistake. So, I am going to let them do it again." Marlene frowned. "You are going to let them steal from you. I am going to play the part they cast me in," I replied. "I will be the forgetful, senile old woman. I will leave my purse out. I will forget where I put my card. I will let Brianna think she is getting away with it. Every time she swipes that card, she is signing her own confession." Before I returned to Maple Ridge, I stopped at a bank in the city, one with no branches in our small town. I transferred 80% of my remaining savings into a new account. I put Marlene's name on it as a co-signer, a fail-safe in case something happened to me. When I got home, the house was empty. I walked into the kitchen and saw the notepad on the counter where I usually wrote grocery lists. I picked up a pen. I did not write a list of vegetables. I wrote a declaration. Day 7. I wrote, the ink dark and permanent. I have officially stopped being a mother in the old way. From this moment on, I am the bookkeeper of my own life, and the debt named Jason and Brianna must balance. I stood at the top of the hallway, clutching a bottle of my blood pressure medication. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of Brianna's boots near the front door. As she turned the corner, I let my hand go limp. The plastic bottle hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, the cap popping off and scattering small white pills across the dark wood like hail. I crouched down, forcing my hands to tremble visibly. Oh dear, I stammered, making sure my voice sounded thin and reedy. My clumsy hands. I just cannot seem to hold on to anything anymore. Brianna stopped. She did not bend down to help me pick them up. Instead, she stood over me, her shadow stretching long across the floor. She crossed her arms. You know, Mum, she said, her tone dripping with false concern. Maybe it is time we looked at that place over on Elm Street, the assisted living facility. They have nurses who handle all this. It would let Jason and me focus on, well, building our future without worrying about you falling. I looked up at Jason, who was standing behind her. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, staring intently at his phone, scrolling through nothing. His silence was a co-signature on her cruelty. I will think about it, I whispered, gathering the pills with agonizing slowness. They bought the performance. They thought I was fading. In reality, I was sharpening. The next morning, while they slept in, I taped a small digital voice recorder under the lip of the kitchen island. I had paid $40 cash for it at an electronics store 2 towns over. It was small, black, and invisible, unless you were on your hands and knees. That evening, I retrieved it and plugged it into my laptop in the safety of my locked bedroom. The audio was crisp. If we get on the deed as co-owners now. Brianna's voice hissed through my headphones, accompanied by the sound of her chopping carrots. We bypass probate. No splitting it with any long-lost cousins or charity. It becomes ours automatically when she... You know? I know, babe. Jason's voice replied. I am working on it. She is almost ready to sign. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, but I pushed it down. I needed more. Later that night, I sat on the sofa while Brianna was browsing on her laptop. I pulled my credit card from my sweater pocket. Brianna, dear, I said, projecting a confused weariness. Could you help me order those joint supplements? My eyes hurt when I look at the screen, and I get so confused with the checkout forms. Sure, Mum, she said, snatching the card a little too quickly. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She did not just enter the numbers for a one-time purchase. I saw her click the box that said Save Payment Method. She was locking the door to my vault from the inside, thinking I was too blind to see the key. 2 days later, Marlene introduced me to Cole. He was a private investigator who had spent 30 years catching insurance fraudsters. He met me in the back of a library, looking like a man carved out of granite. He did not ask why a mother was investigating her son. He just asked for the schedule. I will get you the paper trail, Cole said, his voice gravelly. You just keep the card active. By the end of the week. Cole handed me a manila envelope. Inside were high-resolution photographs. There was Jason eating a steak dinner at a place that charged $80 a plate. There was Brianna coming out of a designer boutique with 3 large bags. And most damning of all, a video file on a USB drive showing a waiter at the Copper Lantern taking my specific card from Brianna's hand while Jason toasted her glass. While they were out spending my money, I was busy securing my legacy. I went to the local notary office. I sat with a young lawyer and completely redrew my will. The house would not go to Jason. Upon my death, it was to be sold immediately. The proceeds, along with my remaining savings, were to be transferred to the Silver Shield Trust, a foundation dedicated to helping elderly victims of financial abuse. Marlene had drafted a special clause for me, which I added in bold text. Any beneficiary found to have forged my signature or misappropriated my assets is immediately and permanently disinherited from any claim to my estate. I signed the document with a steady hand. The notary stamp hit the paper with a heavy, final thud. That night, I sat in my old armchair in the living room. Jason was watching a comedy on the television, laughing loudly at the screen. Brianna was curled up on the love seat, tapping away on her phone, likely ordering something else she did not need with money she did not earn. They looked so comfortable. They thought they were waiting out the clock on a useless old woman. They did not know that the woman in the chair was no longer their mother. I was the architect of their ruin. I looked at the back of Jason's head and smiled. It was not the polite, enduring smile I had worn for years. It was the smile of someone who had read the last page of the book and knew exactly how the villains would fall. Enjoy the show, I thought to myself. The commercials are almost over. The pressure in the house shifted from a low hum to a high-pitched whine. Tuesday evening. Jason came into the kitchen with a stack of papers thick enough to break a table leg. His face was flushed with the manic energy of a gambler who thinks he has finally cracked the system. It is 99% done. Mom, he said, slapping the documents down next to my fruit bowl. This financing for the digital marketing firm, it is massive. It is the big leagues. We just need to finalize the collateral structure. He flipped the pages rapidly, bypassing paragraphs of dense legal text until he found a page with a yellow sticky note arrow pointing to a signature line. Do I need to sign this? Jason, I asked, putting a trembling hand to my chest. I do not understand these terms. Jason laughed, a nervous, barking sound. Mum, relax. It is just standard procedure. The house is still 100% yours. This is just a formality to show the bank we have assets. It is just a piece of paper. I looked at the line. It was not just a piece of paper. Earlier that afternoon, while Jason was in the shower, I had photographed every page and sent them to Marlene. Her reply had come an hour later, and reading it had made my blood turn to ice. There was a clause buried on page 42. It was a default provision. If Jason missed a single payment, which, given his spending habits, was a mathematical certainty, the lender could seize the property immediately without a foreclosure hearing and without notifying the co-signer. That was me. He was asking me to sign my own eviction notice. I looked up at my son. I saw the desperation in his eyes, the greed masking itself as ambition. If I refused to sign now, the explosion would happen here, in this kitchen. He would scream. He would guilt trip, and he might even get violent. I was not ready for that. I needed a public stage. Well, I said, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. If it helps you, Jason, of course. But this is a big step. We should not just sign it over coffee. Let us have a proper celebration. A real family dinner. Right here, tomorrow night. Then I will sign. Jason exchanged a look with Brianna, who was lurking in the doorway. I saw the relief wash over them. They thought they had won. Great idea, Mum, Brianna said, stepping forward. A big dinner. You cook your roast beef, and we will open a bottle of wine. I nodded. Yes, my roast beef. But the script played out exactly as I knew it would. 2 days later, an hour before I was supposed to start cooking. Brianna came down the stairs wrapped in a thick robe, clutching her throat. Mom, she rasped, offering a performance that would not have passed a high school drama audition. I'm so sorry. I think I caught a bug at the gym. My throat is on fire. I cannot eat a thing. I looked at her, my face a mask of concern. Oh, you poor dear. Should we cancel? Yeah, Jason said quickly, stepping in. Let her rest. We will do the dinner another night. Do not worry about the signing. Mum, we can do that in the morning. I agreed and told them I would go to bed early. But I did not go to bed. I stood at the top of the stairs in the dark, listening. God, that was close, Jason whispered, his voice carrying up the stairwell. I cannot eat another one of her dry roasts. The reservation at the Copper Lantern is for 7 o'clock. Did she suspect anything? Brianna asked, her voice miraculously cured of its rasp. No. She is clueless, Jason replied. She can eat the leftovers in the fridge. Tonight, we celebrate. Bring the card. The word leftovers hit me harder than the theft. To them, I was not just a source of funds. I was refuse. I was something to be discarded and reheated only when necessary. I went back to my room and locked the door. I opened my laptop and composed an email to Cole and Marlene. Subject: The dinner is tonight. Time: 7 o'clock. Location: the Copper Lantern. Status: They are bringing the card. Bring the police. I hit send. Marlene replied within 2 minutes. She had already alerted the fraud division at the bank and the district economic crimes investigator. The trap was set. The bait was taken. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my wallet. I pulled out the credit card I had secretly intercepted from the mail yesterday, the replacement card the bank had sent after I reported the old one damaged to keep the account active but flagged. I held the plastic rectangle in my hand. It was thin, flexible, and sharp at the edges. For months, they had used this piece of plastic to cut away at my dignity, my security, and my heart. They had used it to bleed me dry, but they did not understand how leverage worked. You sharpened it, I whispered to the empty room, turning the card over in my fingers. Now, I am going to use it. I stood up and reached for my coat. I was not going to eat leftovers. I was going to serve the main course. I dressed for war in the silence of my bedroom. I did not put on a suit of armor. I put on a pair of sensible grey slacks and the heavy wool coat that had belonged to Thomas. It was 2 sizes too big for me, but it smelled faintly of engine oil and tobacco, and that was the only protection I needed. Downstairs? I heard the front door close. Jason had called out moments before, his voice thick with fake concern, saying they were just going to the drugstore to get some soup and medicine. I waited until the sound of his engine faded down the street, swallowed by the night. I stood up. The fatigue I had feigned for the last 3 hours evaporated. I walked to the desk and picked up my large leather tote bag. It was heavy. Inside, I had the binder. It contained the credit card statements, the bank letters, the forged credit limit increase, the new will, and the voice recorder. I checked the pocket of my coat to ensure I had the original credit card, the one they thought they were using, but which was actually safe with me. The one in Brianna's purse was active, yes, but it was being watched by eyes far more dangerous than mine. I drove to the Copper Lantern. It was the most expensive restaurant in town, a place where the valet parking cost more than my weekly electric bill. I parked my old sedan down the street, in the shadows, and walked to the entrance. The restaurant was a world of golden light and soft jazz. Through the glass doors, I could see the dining room. It was bathed in an amber glow, filled with the murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of crystal. The air smelled of expensive perfume and truffle oil. It was a stage set for the successful. And tonight, my son and his wife were playing the leading roles. I stepped into the foyer but stayed back, hidden by a large decorative fern and the dim lighting of the coat check area. I scanned the room. There they were, center table. Jason looked handsome in his navy blazer, his face flushed with wine. Brianna was wearing a black dress I knew cost $400 because I had seen the charge on the statement last Tuesday. She looked radiant, the picture of a young woman who had just conquered the world. "To the house?" I heard Brianna say. Her voice carried over the low hum of the jazz saxophone. She raised her wine glass, the crystal catching the light. "Soon. The deed will have our names on it. No more asking for permission." I shifted my gaze to the bar. Sitting on a stool, nursing a soda, was Cole. He looked like just another tired businessman. But his phone was propped up against the napkin holder. The camera lens aimed directly at table 4. He was recording every second. In a booth tucked away in the far corner, obscured by a pillar, I saw Marlene. Next to her sat the branch manager of the community bank and a man in a grey suit, the district fraud investigator. They were not eating. They were watching, waiting for the signal. The waiter approached Jason and Brianna's table with the leather bill folder. This was the moment. The trap was springing shut. Brianna laughed, a sound that used to make me smile but now made my skin crawl. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the credit card. My card. She tossed it onto the bill folder with a casual arrogance, as if it were a limitless magic wand. Jason raised his glass again, leaning in conspiratorially. He was loud enough that a couple at the next table turned to look. "Dinner is cancelled." Jason chuckled, slurring his words slightly. "Cheers to Mom's card." They clinked glasses, throwing their heads back in laughter. They were laughing at the memory of my voice on the speaker. They were laughing at the old woman eating leftovers in the dark. The waiter picked up the folder. He held the card in his hand, about to turn toward the terminal. That was my cue. I stepped out from behind the fern. I did not walk with the shuffle of an old lady. I walked with the stride of a factory auditor coming to close the books. The heavy wool coat swished around my legs. The maître d' started to move toward me to ask for a reservation, but stopped when he saw the look on my face. I walked straight toward the center of the room. The ambient noise seemed to drop away, leaving only the sound of my shoes on the hardwood floor. Brianna was still smiling, the glass touching her lips. Then, her eyes drifted past Jason's shoulder. She saw the grey slacks. She saw the oversized wool coat. And finally, She met my eyes. The smile died on her face instantly, like a candle blown out in a gale. Her hand froze in midair. Jason, seeing her expression, started to turn around, his grin faltering. But I was not looking at Jason. I was looking at the waiter. The card, my financial life, my dignity, my trust was resting in his palm. It was no longer a tool for their pleasure. It was the evidence for their conviction. I stopped 10 feet away. The restaurant was warm, but the look I gave my daughter-in-law was absolute zero. The waiter looked at me, then at the card, sensing the sudden, violent tension in the air. The toast was over. The bill had arrived. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply walked up to the fourth chair at their table, pulled it out with a scrape of wood against the floor, and sat down. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Brianna lowered her wine glass, her hand trembling so violently that a drop of red wine spilled onto the white tablecloth like a drop of blood. "Mom," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room. "Mom, what are you doing here? I thought you were..." "Asleep." "Sleeping off the roast beef?" I asked, my voice calm and conversational. "Or lying in bed thinking about the dinner that was cancelled?" "Yes. I remember quite a bit lately." The waiter, a young man with a thin moustache, looked between us, sensing the sudden drop in temperature. He was still holding the black credit card. "Excuse me, Ma'am?" he said, looking at me nervously. Is this your card?" I looked him in the eye. "Yes, it is. And I want to hear you read the name on that account out loud. Clearly. Please." He glanced at the card. "Evelyn Hart." "Thank you," I said. I reached into my heavy tote bag. I did not pull out a weapon, but what I placed on the table was far more dangerous. I laid down the stack of papers. Thud. The credit card statements highlighting the dinners. Thud. The photos Cole had taken of their shopping sprees. Thud. The loan application with the forged signature. It looked like a prosecutor's case file, right there next to the breadbasket. The chatter in the restaurant died down. People were watching. They sensed a spectacle. Jason's face turned a deep, blotchy red. He leaned in, his voice a frantic whisper. "Mom, stop it. Put those away. You are making a scene. We are family. We can talk about this at home." I looked at my son. I looked for the boy I used to help with algebra. But I only saw a stranger in a suit I had paid for. "Family?" I asked, my voice cutting through the air like a razor. What kind of family uses their mother's forged signature to increase a credit limit by $10,000? What kind of family tries to put a lien on a widow's home without her knowing? Jason opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a fish on a hook. At that moment, Marlene stood up from her corner booth. The bank manager and the man in the grey suit stood with her. They walked across the room in a phalanx of authority. "Good evening," Marlene said, her voice projecting clearly. "I am Marlene Davis, Mrs. Hart's attorney. This is Mr. Henderson from Maple Ridge Community Bank, and this is Investigator Cole from the District Economic Crimes Unit." Brianna's face went pale, her makeup suddenly looking stark against her skin. She tried to pivot, her survival instinct kicking in. She let me use it," Brianna cried out, her voice shrill. "She forgets things. She told me to take it." She is confused," I did not argue. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out the small voice recorder. I placed it on the table and pressed the play button. The sound was tinny, but unmistakable. Brianna's voice floated up from the device, echoing in the silent restaurant. She is clueless. She probably forgets what she bought 5 minutes ago. Just swipe it. We are toasting with your mom's card, babe. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. Brianna stared at the device as if it were a venomous snake. The man in the grey suit stepped forward. He did not look amused. Mr. and Mrs. Hart, he said, his tone professional and bored. We have sufficient evidence here to open a formal investigation into elder financial abuse, identity theft, and bank fraud. The bank has already flagged the transactions as unauthorized. Mom, Jason choked out, tears of panic welling in his eyes. Mom, please, do not do this. It was just... We were going to pay it back. With what I asked. With the house you were planning to steal, I reached for the water glass in front of me. My hand was steady. I raised it in a mock toast. You said dinner was cancelled? Jason? I said, looking him dead in the eye. But this dinner is not cancelled. It has just changed meaning. This is the dinner that ends your illusion. Tonight. The Bank of Evelyn Hart is permanently closed. I took a sip of the water. It was cool and clean. Brianna looked at me, her mouth opening and closing, her arrogance stripped away, leaving nothing but fear. The waiter gently placed the check on the table, not near Jason, but right in the center, a white flag of surrender on a battlefield they never saw coming. 3 weeks later. The mediation room in the district courthouse smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a small, windowless box designed to contain messy lives. But today, it felt like an operating room. I sat on one side of the heavy mahogany table with Marlene. On the other side sat Jason and Brianna. Without the soft lighting of expensive restaurants or the comfort of my living room to hide behind, they looked small. They looked like children who had been caught playing with matches. Their lawyer was a young man with a shiny suit who clearly wanted to be somewhere else. He cleared his throat and offered a weak smile. Your Honor, he said to the mediator, smoothing his tie. This is really just an unfortunate family misunderstanding. A miscommunication about shared assets and implied consent. It was a nice story, but stories crumble against mathematics. Marlene did not say a word. She simply laid out the timeline. She presented the forensic handwriting analysis that proved I did not sign the credit limit increase. She presented the video logs from the restaurant. And finally, she played the audio recording. When Brianna's voice filled the sterile room, laughing about my memory and mocking my trust, the air seemed to leave the space. Brianna stared at the table, her face a mask of red shame. Jason looked at the wall, unable to meet my eyes. The judgment was swift and clinical. The mediator and the judge's representative agreed. Jason and Brianna were liable for the full repayment of the unauthorized debt, totaling over $12,000. They were permanently enjoined from accessing any of my financial accounts. The judge looked at them over his spectacles and spoke with a voice like gravel. You are lucky, Mrs. Hart is seeking civil resolution, he said. If this were a criminal trial, you would be looking at jail time for fraud. One more step out of line, one more attempt to contact her financial institutions, and I will personally recommend prosecution. Then came the twist. The judge asked about the restitution payments. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. I do not want the money, I said, my voice steady. I want the court to order that all restitution payments be made directly to the Maple Ridge Silver Shield Trust. It is a local fund that provides legal aid to elderly victims of financial abuse. Jason made a sound like he had been punched in the stomach. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. For a second, I saw my son again. Not the man who wanted a luxury car, but the boy who used to scrape his knees. "Mom," he choked out, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I wanted to get ahead. I wanted to move faster than this town would let me. I did not mean to hurt you." I looked at him, and though my heart ached, my eyes remained dry. "You moved so fast you left me behind," I said softly. Brianna was not crying. She was glaring. She leaned across the table, her voice a poisonous whisper. "You know you just destroyed our future, right, with this on our record. We cannot get a loan for years." I met her gaze without blinking. "No," I replied. "You just received the bill for the debt you created. I did not touch your future, Brianna. I just protected my name." When the session ended, I signed the final papers. I confirmed the sale of the house to a nice young couple. I removed Jason from my will entirely. I was walking away with nothing but my clothes and my savings, but I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. I walked out into the long, echoing hallway. I heard running footsteps behind me. "Mom!" "Wait." Jason caught up to me near the exit. He was breathless, desperate. Can we start over? I will get a second job. I will fix this. Please." "Mom." I turned and looked at him for a long time. I studied the face I had washed 1,000 times, the face I had loved more than my own life. "Jason," I said, my voice final. "The day you let your wife toast with my card and laughed. You put a knife in my heart yourself. Some wounds heal, but they do not forget. I am not in a position to give you any more loans. Not financial ones, and not emotional ones." I turned my back on him and pushed open the heavy double doors. The air outside was crisp and cold. The sun was shining at a sharp angle, illuminating the concrete steps. I stood there for a moment, alone. I reached into my purse and pulled out my new debit card. It was blue. It had my name on it. Just my name. I looked at it, then tucked it safely away. A card can be stolen, but honor cannot. Today, I finally cancelled the right dinner. The dinner where I spend my whole life paying for people who do not know how to say thank you. Thanks so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you guys are tuning in from. So drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's see how far this story travels. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Smash that like button and hit the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, everyone.